I saw her today, my ex-wife Sarah, and she was holding hands with him. The man I sent to prison, the man I put away for 20 years. My world, already wobbly from the divorce, didn't just tip over. It shattered into a million tiny jagged pieces, each one reflecting a different horror. It was Tuesday afternoon, a bright, deceptively normal day. I was grabbing a coffee from my usual spot, trying to clear my head after another long morning at the DA's office. I just stepped out, feeling the sun on my face when I saw them. At first, it was just a couple walking towards me, laughing. She had that laugh, the one that used to make my insides feel warm and safe. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Then I saw his face. Even after 7 years, the memory of him was burned into my mind. The cold, calculating eyes. The smirk. Mark Jensen. He was thinner now, a little older, but it was him. No doubt about it. My breath hit. My coffee cup, suddenly heavy, threatened to slip from my grasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. Sarah, my Sarah, was leaning into him, her head tilted, that familiar intimate gesture she used to reserve for me. Her hand was intertwined with his, their fingers locked together like they belonged. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her with someone new. It was the absolute, soul-crushing impossibility of who that someone was. Mark Jensen, the man who had terrorized a family, stolen their sense of safety, and in a moment of pure, senseless violence, taken a life. I remember every detail of that case. Crime scene photos, the grieving family's testimony, the long, grueling hours I spent building the case against him. I was the lead prosecutor. I argued for his conviction with every fiber of my being. I saw him get the maximum sentence, 20 years. And now here he was, free, and with Sarah. My Sarah. The words she'd thrown at me during our divorce, sharp and biting, echoed in my ears. You are the worst husband, Alex. You hear me? The absolute worst. I remember her face, twisted in anger, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'd believed her in a way. I'd spent countless nights dissecting my failures, wondering where I went wrong, how I could have been so blind, so distant, so worse. But now, seeing her with Mark, those words took on a new, horrifying meaning. Was this her definition of better? A convicted murderer? A man I had fought tooth and nail to keep off the streets. It felt like a sick, twisted joke, a punishment I couldn't possibly deserve. They were still walking closer now. They hadn't seen me. I stood frozen, rooted to the spot, feeling like a ghost. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. Any explanation that made sense. Had he been released early? A parole? How could Sarah possibly know him? And how could she be with him? The question screamed in my head, a cacophony of disbelief. I remembered the trial, the way Mark looked at me across the courtroom, a hint of something dark and knowing in his eyes. Even as the judge read out the guilty verdict, it was the look of a man who thought he was smarter, untouchable. I'd dismissed it as arrogance. Now I wondered if there was something else. A secret I never knew, a connection I couldn't comprehend. My hands started to tremble. Coffee cup clattered against the pavement. Hot liquid splashing onto my shoes. The sharp scent of burnt sugar filled the air, a fitting metaphor for the bitter taste in my mouth. They looked up, finally, drawn by the sound. Sarah's eyes met mine. Her smile faltered. Her face, usually so expressive, went blank. It was a mask of shock, then quickly something else. A flicker of defiance. Fear, I couldn't tell. Her grip on Mark's hand tightened. Mark, for his part, just stared. That same cold, calculating stare from the courtroom. Only now it held a hint of triumph, a smug satisfaction. The world seemed to tilt. The sounds of the city faded away. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my heart and the blood rushing in my ears. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a direct hit. A bomb exploding in the quiet. Fragile peace I had managed to build after the divorce. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to shake her, to scream. "What are you doing? Do you know who this man is?" But the words caught in my throat, strangled by the sheer disbelief. I just stood there, a statue of betrayal and pain, watching them. Mark squeezed Sarah's hand. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was a victor's nod, a taunt. Sarah pulled her arm away from his grasp, just slightly, her gaze still locked on mine. Her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Then Mark pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her waist, possessively. His eyes never left mine, and in them I saw it clearly, a message. He won. He didn't just get out of prison, he got my wife, the woman who called me the worst. The woman who was now with the man I'd put behind bars. I turned and walked away blindly. I didn't care where I was going, just away from them, away from that shattering image. The sun suddenly felt too hot, the air too thick. Every step was heavy, as if I was wading through quicksand. The bitterness of the coffee, the memory of her laugh, the coldness of his eyes, it all swirled together in a sickening vortex. The worst husband. The words had haunted me for years. Now, I wondered if this was the ultimate punishment for whatever I had done or failed to do. Punishment crafted by fate, delivered by the very people who had once been so deeply entwined in my life. The man I'd sent away had returned, and in doing so, he had torn the last shred of my broken reality to pieces. It feels like a lifetime ago, the beginning of Sarah and me. We met in college, a whirlwind of late-night study sessions and shared dreams. She was an art history major, all passion and vibrant colors. I was law school bound, precise and analytical. Opposites, yes, but we fit. Or so I thought. She made me laugh. She softened my edges. She saw the person underneath the ambition. I admired her creativity, her free spirit. We were young and stupid and completely in love. We got married right after law school. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. We promised forever, believing every word. Our first apartment was tiny, filled with hand-me-down furniture and big plans. I started my career as a junior prosecutor, full of idealism and a burning desire for justice. Sarah was working at a local art gallery, saving up for her own studio one day. Life felt simple then, full of promise. The shift, I think, was gradual. Like a slow leak in a tire, you don't notice it until you are almost flat. My job started consuming me. The hours were long, the cases emotionally draining. I'd come home exhausted, my mind still replaying court testimonies, cross-examinations, witness statements. Sarah would try to talk to me, to connect, but I was often just absent. Physically there, but mentally miles away. "Alex, are you even listening?" she'd ask, her voice laced with a frustration that wasn't there in our early years. I'd snap back to attention, blinking. "Of course, baby, just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness, it was a shift in priority. My cases became everything. They were complex puzzles, human dramas, and I felt a heavy responsibility to get things right, to bring justice. And I was good at it. Very good. My conviction rate was high. My bosses were impressed. But the cost was high too. Sarah started spending more time alone. She'd invite me to art exhibits, to dinner with her friends, but I'd often cancel last minute, caught up in a new motion or an emergency meeting. I'd come home late to a cold dinner and a sleeping wife. The silence in the apartment grew heavier each night. We started having the same argument over and over. "You are never here, Alex," she'd say, her voice quiet but firm. Or, "When you are not really here. You are always thinking about work." I'd get defensive. "Someone has to do this, Sarah. People's lives are at stake. I am trying to make a difference." "What about our life, Alex?" she'd retort, her eyes flashing. "Doesn't that matter?" I didn't know how to answer that. Of course it mattered, but I felt trapped. If I eased up on work, I'd be letting down victims, letting down justice. If I kept going, I was letting down Sarah. I tried to balance it, I really did. I'd schedule a date night, then have to cancel. I'd promise a weekend getaway, then get called in for an urgent brief. The promises started to sound hollow even to me. The intimacy faded too. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Easy laughter, the shared secrets, the feeling of being each other's safe harbor, it all slowly eroded. We lived in the same house, but we were becoming strangers. Then came the bigger cases. The ones that made headlines, that dominated the news. They demanded even more of me. I remember one Christmas Eve I was still at the office, poring over evidence while Sarah was home, probably alone. I called her full of apologies, promising to make it up to her. Her voice was flat. "Don't worry about it, Alex. I am used to it." That hit me hard. Used to it. She was used to my absence, used to my apologies, used to being second. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing I was doing this to the woman I love. But I told myself it was for a good cause, for the greater good. I was a prosecutor. I was fighting for justice. It was my calling, and the arguments grew more frequent, more intense. The words became sharper. She started saying things like, "You've changed, Alex. You are not the man I married." Or, "You are so cold now. All you care about is your cases." I felt misunderstood. I was fighting to keep the world safe, to bring some order to chaos. Didn't she see that? Didn't she appreciate the weight of what I carried? I thought she would be proud. Instead, she seemed to resent it. The worst husband accusation came during one of our biggest fights, about a year before the Mark Jensen trial. I had just come home from a particularly gruesome crime scene, still shaken, still trying to process the sheer depravity I'd witnessed. Sarah was waiting for me. She'd planned a surprise dinner, a rare night where she thought we could just be us. "You are late," she said, her voice tight. Again. I remember feeling a wave of exhaustion and frustration. "Sarah, I just came from a murder scene. Can we not do this right now?" "It's always a murder scene, isn't it, Alex?" she yelled, her voice breaking. "Always some case, always some excuse. What about me? What about us? Do I even exist to you anymore?" I snapped. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I am trying my best. I'm trying to make a difference." "You are just trying to make a name for yourself," she screamed back, tears streaming down her face. "You are obsessed. You've become a stranger. You are the worst husband, Alex. The absolute worst." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I couldn't respond. I just stood there, watching her sob, feeling utterly helpless. That night, she slept on the couch. It wasn't the first time, but it felt like a point of no return. We were drifting apart, an iceberg slowly splitting in two. And I, in my blindness and my dedication to justice, couldn't see how to stop. The Mark Jensen case was just around the corner, waiting to deliver the final crushing blow. The Mark Jensen case wasn't just another file on my desk. It was the kind of case that burrows deep under your skin, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about humanity. Consumed me in a way no other case had before, and probably none had since. Also became the final nail in the coffin of my marriage, though I didn't see it clearly at the time. It started with a call in the middle of the night. A home invasion, a robbery gone wrong, in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew all their neighbors. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a beloved retired school teacher, known for her community work and her endless supply of cookies, was found dead in her living room. The thieves had tied her up, ransacked her house, and then, for reasons that still escape me, smothered her. Not in the heat of passion, not in a struggle. Just a slow, deliberate act to silence her, to eliminate a witness. It was cold, calculated, and horrifying. I was assigned to the case. From the moment I stepped into Mrs. Vance's meticulously kept home, now a crime scene, I felt a personal commitment. Her life had been cut short by pure evil, by someone who saw her not as a person, but as an obstacle to their greed. I looked at the photos of her smiling face, her gentle eyes, and I swore to myself I would get justice for her. The investigation was long and arduous. We had limited evidence at first. No forced entry, which suggested she might have known her attackers or opened the door to them. That was a chilling thought. We traced a few leads, followed every tip. My office became my second home. I worked 18-hour days. Fueled by bad coffee and an unyielding sense of purpose, I cancelled plans with Sarah constantly. I skipped meals. My focus was singular. Sarah tried to understand at first. She'd bring me dinner to the office, a thermos of tea, a word of encouragement. "You are doing good, Alex," she'd say, even as her eyes held a hint of sadness. But as the weeks turned into months, her patience wore thin. She saw the toll it was taking on me, not just physically, but emotionally. I was becoming harder, more cynical. The innocence I once had, the belief in the fundamental good of people, was slowly being chipped away. Mark Jensen's name first came up as a potential suspect through an informant. He had a record: petty theft, assault, nothing as serious as murder. But his name kept appearing in connection to other small-time criminals who knew about Mrs. Vance's perceived wealth. He was intelligent, manipulative, and had a reputation for getting others to do his dirty work. He was also known for being utterly ruthless. When we finally brought him in, he oozed arrogance. He was charming, in a slick, unsettling way. He denied everything, calmly and confidently. He had an alibi, a flimsy one, but an alibi nonetheless. He laughed at our questions, insulted our intelligence. He looked at me, a young, ambitious prosecutor, as if I was a nuisance, a fly he could swat away. That look, that condescending smirk, only fueled my determination. We worked tirelessly to break his alibi, to connect him directly to the scene. It was a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. We found an accomplice, scared and remorseful, who finally cracked under pressure. He confessed everything. Jensen had been the mastermind. He had gone to Mrs. Vance's house under the guise of offering her a home repair service, gained her trust, and then forced his way in. He was the one who had smothered her, according to the accomplice. The accomplice, a pathetic young man named Davy, had simply stood by, terrified. It was sickening, the callousness of it. Mark Jensen wasn't just a thief. He was a predator, and he had no remorse. During interrogations, even when confronted with the accomplice's testimony, he remained cool, collected, denying everything with a practiced ease. He seemed to relish the game, the dance of wits. "You won't get me, counselor," he'd said to me once, leaning back in his chair in the interrogation room, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I am smarter than you think." I took that as a personal challenge. I poured every ounce of my energy into building an airtight case. I spent late nights going over phone records, bank statements, grainy surveillance footage. I cross-referenced alibis, found inconsistencies. I became obsessed. Sarah saw it. She saw me disappear behind a wall of legal jargon and case file. She stopped asking me about my day because she knew the answer. She stopped trying to draw me out. The silence between us grew from uncomfortable to unbearable. We were roommates barely. "You are gone, Alex," she'd said one night, after I'd been home for less than an hour before diving back into files. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "You are just not here anymore." I remembered reaching for her hand, but she pulled it away. "I am here, Sarah," I'd mumbled, my eyes already back on the evidence photos of Mrs. Vance's living room. "No, you are not," she whispered. "You haven't been for a long time." That conversation haunted me, but I pushed it aside. Justice for Mrs. Vance. That was my mantra. That was my focus. I convinced myself that once the trial was over, once Jensen was locked away, I could fix things with Sarah. I could return to her. I could be the husband she deserved. I told myself it was just a temporary sacrifice, a necessary evil for the greater good. I was so wrong. The Mark Jensen case didn't just change my life. It ended my marriage. And the man I was about to put away was about to become a ghost in my future, haunting me in ways I could never have imagined. The trial of Mark Jensen was grueling. It lasted for weeks, a daily battle of wills in the sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom. Every day I stood before the jury, presenting evidence, questioning witnesses, chipping away at Jensen's facade of innocence. He sat at the defense table, always impeccably dressed, his face a mask of calm indifference. Sometimes I would catch his eye, and he would offer a faint, knowing smirk, as if challenging me, daring me to break him. His defense team was aggressive. They painted Jensen as a victim of circumstance, a man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, an innocent scapegoat. They attacked our witnesses, tried to discredit the accomplice, Davy, as an unreliable liar. They tried to sow doubt, to create enough uncertainty to let their client walk free. But I had built a solid case, meticulously, patient. I had the facts, the forensics, and the damning testimony of Davy. I remember my closing argument vividly. I stood before the jury, looking into their faces, trying to convey the enormity of what Mark Jensen had done. I spoke of Mrs. Vance, not just as a victim, but as a person, a cherished member of the community. I spoke of the terror she must have felt, the betrayal of her trust. I spoke of Jensen's coldness, his lack of remorse. I asked the jury to look past the smooth words of his lawyers and see the truth, to do justice. When the jury finally came back, after 2 days of deliberation, the tension in the courtroom was suffocating. I held my breath. Mrs. Vance's family, who had sat through every painful day of testimony, clutched each other's hands. Jensen sat impassively, but I saw a flicker in his eyes, a slight tremor in his jaw. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Jensen, guilty. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Collective sigh of relief swept through the gallery from Mrs. Vance's family. I felt a surge of triumph, a rush of vindication. Justice! It was a tangible thing, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Jensen's mask finally cracked. His eyes, fixed on me, narrowed with a chilling fury. The smirk was gone, replaced by pure hatred. The sentencing was a few weeks later. The judge, after hearing the victim impact statements, sentenced Mark Jensen to the maximum 20 years to life. As he was led away, Jensen looked back at me and his eyes held a promise. A silent, terrifying promise of revenge. I dismissed it. He was a criminal, a caged animal. He couldn't hurt me. He couldn't touch my life. I was wrong. I went home that night, exhausted but exhilarated. I had done it. I had put a dangerous man behind bars. I expected Sarah to be there waiting, maybe a little celebration. I had called her earlier after the verdict to tell her the news. Her response had been brief, just a quiet, "That's good, Alex." But when I walked into our apartment, it was dark. Quiet. Sarah wasn't there. I checked her art studio, our bedroom, the kitchen. Nothing. Her car was gone. Panic started to set in. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. Hours passed. I paced the apartment, my initial triumph giving way to a gnawing dread. Around 2 a.m. she finally came home. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She smelled faintly of alcohol. "Where have you been, Sarah?" I asked, relief and anger warring inside me. She looked at me, her gaze distant. "I was with a friend. I needed to get out." "You could have called," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What's the point, Alex?" she replied, her voice flat. "You wouldn't have cared anyway. You were too busy with your big win." My exhilaration evaporated. It wasn't just a win, Sarah, it was justice. For Mrs. Vance, for her family, she scoffed. "And what about justice for us, Alex?" "For me? Did you ever stop to think about that? All these months you were a ghost. You were here but you weren't. You were obsessed, you still are." "It's over now," I pleaded, taking a step towards her. "We can go back to normal. I can be here for you." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Normal? What's normal, Alex? Our life is just your cases. Your career. You are so wrapped up in it you've forgotten how to be a husband, how to be a person." "I am not cold, Sarah," I argued, feeling a desperate need for her to understand. I had to do this. It was important, more important than me." She challenged, her voice rising. "More important than us?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I couldn't say no, not truthfully. At that moment, chasing Jensen, putting him away, had felt like the most important thing in the world. And in saying nothing, I gave her my answer. "You really are the worst husband, Alex," she whispered, her voice broken. "You always put your work first. You always put me second. I am tired of being second." She turned and walked into our bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. I stood in the living room, surrounded by the silence, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. The triumph of the verdict, the joy of serving justice had vanished, replaced by a crushing weight of failure. I had won the biggest case of my career, but I had lost the most important person in my life. Justice had been served, but my marriage was irrevocably broken. I didn't know it then. But this night, this argument was the beginning of the end. The divorce papers would follow. But the foundation had already crumbled. The argument after Mark Jensen's sentencing was the final tremor before the earthquake. For weeks, the air in our apartment was thick with unspoken words, with the cold resentment that had replaced love. We moved around each other like strangers, each step a careful avoidance of collision. The silences stretched on, suffocating us. I tried to talk, to apologize, to bridge the gap, but Sarah had built walls I couldn't penetrate. She was done. The morning she left, she didn't say goodbye. I woke up to an empty bed, a note on the pillow. Her handwriting, usually so elegant, was shaky. I can't do this anymore, Alex. I need to find my own peace. I am going to stay with my sister for a while. Don't try to call. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I read the note again and again as if the words would change. But they didn't. She was gone. Just like that. After all the years, all the promises, all the shared dreams. She just packed a bag and left. It felt like a punch to the gut. A betrayal almost as deep as seeing her with Mark Jensen now. Almost. I spent the next few days in a haze. I called her, of course, despite her note. Voicemail, every time. I tried to go to her sister's house, but they wouldn't let me in. They probably saw me as the monster she had described, the worst husband. The house felt vast and empty without her. Every corner, every object held a memory, a phantom presence that haunted me. Her favorite mug on the counter, her scarf draped over a chair, her half-finished painting on the easel in her studio. It was like living in a museum of a lost life. Then, 2 months later, the papers arrived. A thick envelope, official looking with my name on it. Divorce papers. Seeing those words, cold and clinical, made it real. It wasn't just a temporary separation. This was the end. She was filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. My hands trembled as I read through the documents. Each legal term was a dagger. Petitioner, Sarah. Respondent, Alex. The details of our shared life, now reduced to assets and debts, divided by a stark line. It felt like my heart was being ripped out and dissected on a sterile table. I called my own lawyer, a colleague I trusted. He advised me to accept it, to not drag it out. It sounds like she's made up her mind, Alex, he said gently. Fighting it will only make it more painful. But I couldn't just accept it. I wanted to understand. I wanted to fight for her, even if it was too late. We met in a mediator's office a few weeks later. It was the first time I'd seen her since she left. She looked thinner, her eyes still sad, but there was a new resolve in her posture. She wore a simple black dress and her hair was tied back, giving her a serious, almost defiant look. "Sarah," I started, my voice hoarse. "Please, can we talk? Can we try to fix this?" She wouldn't even look at me directly. Her gaze was fixed on the table. "That here is nothing to fix, Alex. It's broken." "But why?" I pressed, desperation rising in my throat. "I know I messed up. I know I was consumed by work. But I can change. I want to change for you." That's when she finally looked at me, and her eyes held a weariness that cut me to the core. "It's too late, Alex, I told you. You were the worst husband. You never saw me. You never heard me. Your job, your cases, your justice. It always came first. I became invisible." "That's not fair," I argued, my own frustration boiling over. I was doing important work. I was putting away dangerous criminals. How could I just turn that off? "You couldn't," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And that's the problem. You chose that life over me, over us. Every single time. Do you know what it feels like to live with someone who's constantly absent, even when they're in the same room? Do you know what it feels like to constantly be less important than a file folder?" I was lonely, Alex. So incredibly lonely, even with you right there. Her words were like blows, each one landing precisely, painfully. I had no defense. She was right. I had been absent. I had prioritized my work. I had let her feel alone. And the guilt, heavy and suffocating, settled over me. "I tried, Alex," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I really did, but you just kept pulling away. And when the Jensen case came, that was it. You vanished completely. I became secondary to a criminal, to a courtroom. How do you think that felt? I wanted to explain, to tell her about the immense pressure, the moral imperative I felt. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She had experienced my absence, my obsession, and it had broken her. It had broken her. It had broken us. The divorce proceedings were painful. We argued over trivial things, small possessions, because it was easier than facing the raw emotional wound between us. Each argument was a reminder of what we had lost. I agreed to most of her terms, just wanting it to be over, wanting the pain to stop. I felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a man. I had messed up the most important relationship in my life. The very foundation of my existence felt shaky. When the judge's gavel finally fell, making it official, I felt a strange mixture of relief and devastation. The chapter of my life with Sarah was officially closed. I was free, but utterly alone. I left the courthouse that day, a divorced man, carrying the weight of her words, "You are the worst husband." Those words echoed in my mind for years, a constant refrain that told me I was unlovable, that I was destined to be alone. I tried to rebuild, to move on, to prove those words wrong, but the shadow of them, and the crushing loneliness they brought, never truly left me. And then I saw her with Mark Jensen, and suddenly, being the worst husband took on a whole new, incomprehensible dimension. After the divorce, my life became a dull, colorless routine. The silence in my apartment was deafening. Every morning, I woke up to an empty bed, a stark reminder of what I had lost. I'd make coffee, eat toast, and head to work. My mind a blank slate of misery. The vibrant colors of our shared life had faded to a monotonous gray. Work, which had once been my refuge and my obsession, now felt like a chore. The cases which used to ignite a fire in me now just felt like more paperwork, more arguments, more pain. I was good at my job, yes, but the passion was gone. I went through the motions, argued cases, secured convictions, but there was no sense of triumph, no feeling of justice served, just emptiness. My friends tried to reach out. They'd invite me for drinks, for dinner, try to set me up on dates. I'd nod, promise to go, but more often than not, I'd cancel at the last minute. The thought of making small talk, of trying to explain the chasm inside me, felt exhausting. I just wanted to be left alone with my thoughts, with my grief. Dating was a disaster. I tried a few times, pushed by well-meaning friends. Each date was a painful reminder of Sarah. I'd find myself comparing every woman to her, searching for her laugh, her quirks, her way of tilting her head when she was thinking. It was unfair to them and agonizing for me. I felt like a broken record, constantly replaying the same mistakes, the same failures. How could I ever be a good partner to anyone else when Sarah, the woman I loved more than anything, had called me the worst? That accusation, those two simple words, had become my defining characteristic. A brand burned onto my soul. Sleep didn't offer much escape either. My nights were restless, filled with dreams of Sarah, of our happier times, only to wake up to the cold reality of my loneliness. Sometimes I'd dream of Mark Jensen, his face sneering from a courtroom, his eyes full of triumph. It was a strange mix of my past and present pains, all swirling together in a confusing nightmare. I tried to pick up new hobbies to fill the void. I bought a guitar, thinking music might be a creative outlet. It sat in the corner of my living room, gathering dust. I joined a gym, hoping physical activity would clear my head. I'd go a few times, then lose motivation. Everything felt pointless. The apartment, once filled with Sarah's art, her laughter, her presence, now echoed with my solitude. I found myself staring at the blank walls for hours, wondering where it all went wrong. Was I truly the worst husband? I replayed every argument, every missed date, every late night at the office. I saw my faults, my tunnel vision, my inability to balance my ambition with my personal life. I understood Sarah's pain, her loneliness, but I also felt a deep sense of injustice. I hadn't intentionally neglected her. I had believed I was doing good, that my work mattered. I was trying to make the world a safer place to bring justice to victims. Was that really so wrong? But her words had stuck. They had festered. They told me I was incapable of love, incapable of a healthy relationship. I started to believe it. Maybe I was better off alone. Maybe I was just meant to be a prosecutor, a solitary figure fighting other people's battles, incapable of winning my own. Years passed. The acute pain dulled into a chronic ache. Life went on in a dull, muted way. I was a functioning adult. I paid my bills, went to work, saw friends occasionally. But the spark was gone. The world felt less vibrant. I was just existing. I heard snippets about Sarah from mutual friends. She had moved back to her hometown, started her own art studio. She seemed to be doing well, thriving. Part of me, the part that still loved her, was genuinely happy for her. Another part, the bitter, wounded part, felt a pang of jealousy. She had moved on. She had found her peace. I was still adrift, navigating the wreckage of our shared past, still haunted by her accusations. I learned to live with the emptiness. I found a certain comfort in the predictability of my lonely routine. I told myself I was strong, that I had survived. I had put a dangerous man behind bars, even if it cost me my marriage. I had done my duty. I stopped thinking about Sarah as much. The memories, while still painful, became less sharp. I imagined her with someone else, of course. It was inevitable. But I always pictured someone kind, someone normal, someone who could appreciate her and give her the attention I never could. Never in a million years did I imagine her with him. Never in my wildest nightmares did I picture her holding hands with Mark Jensen. The man whose face was a symbol of pure evil. The man who had stolen my peace and whose presence had broken my marriage beyond repair. Seeing them together was more than a shock. It was a cosmic joke, a cruel twist of fate that ripped open old wounds and carved out new ones, deeper and more agonizing than anything I had felt before. My life adrift for so long had just crashed onto the sharp, unforgiving rocks of unbelievable reality. The first time I saw them together, it was like a punch to the gut. The air knocked clean out of my lungs. I was walking, or rather stumbling, away from the coffee shop. The image burned into my retina. Sarah, Mark Jensen, hand in hand, laughing. My mind was a kaleidoscope of confusion, denial, and a horrifying dawning realization. I walked for what felt like miles, not really seeing where I was going, my blood pounding in my ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. How was this possible? How? Mark Jensen was supposed to be in prison. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. That meant he should still be behind bars serving his time. 7 years had passed since the trial. He should have at least 13 more years minimum before even being considered for parole. My head spun. I found myself back at my apartment, not even remembering the walk there. I locked the door, feeling an irrational need for security, as if the very air outside was contaminated. I went straight to my laptop, my fingers trembling as I typed his name into the public records database. Mark Jensen. Release date. Parole hearings. Anything. The search results loaded, and my heart sank deeper into my chest. He had been released, yes, on parole 3 months ago. Apparently, due to some technicality about overcrowding, and a program for early release for non-violent offenders who showed exceptional rehabilitation. The word scoffed at me from the screen. Mark Jensen, rehabilitated? The man who had shown not an ounce of remorse. The cold, calculating killer I had put away. It felt like a sick joke, but the most disturbing part wasn't just his release. It was that he was with Sarah, my ex-wife. How could they have met? When and why him? Chilling thought began to form in my mind, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Had Sarah known him before? Was there some connection I had missed? It seemed impossible. She had never shown any interest in my cases, beyond the way they affected our marriage. She had no ties to the criminal world. No, it had to be after his release. But how quickly? And why Mark? My mind raced back to our arguments, to her accusation. You are the worst husband. Had she been secretly involved with him all along? No, that didn't make sense. She had been lonely, yes, but not deceitful like that. Or had she? The thought was a poisoned dart, striking at the very core of my trust. Was this revenge? Was this her twisted way of hurting me, of showing me how much I had failed? I remembered Mark's eyes during the trial, that final look of hatred and triumph. Had he plotted this from prison? Had he somehow found Sarah, knowing she was my ex-wife, knowing it would be the ultimate blow? It sounded like something out of a bad movie, but the reality was unfolding before my very eyes. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they met by chance. Maybe Sarah had no idea who he truly was, beyond what he told her. But that felt unlikely. Sarah was smart. She knew about the case. She knew who Mark Jensen was. She couldn't have forgotten, could she? A wave of nausea washed over me. The betrayal was a multi-layered thing. It was Sarah, the woman I loved, choosing a man who represented everything I fought against. It was Mark, the man I had dedicated my career to imprisoning, walking free and mocking me by taking the very thing I had lost. It was a direct insult, a slap in the face to my entire existence. My phone rang. It was my colleague, David. I stared at the screen, unable to answer. How could I explain this? How could I even begin to articulate the horrifying reality I had just witnessed? I paced the apartment, running my hands through my hair. Was I going crazy? Was this some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and loneliness? I pinched myself. Hard. No, it was real. Their faces, their intertwined hands, the mocking glint in Mark's eyes. It was real. The memories of Sarah flooded back. The good and the bad. Her laugh, her smile, the way she used to lean on me. And then her anger, her accusations, her tears. The worst husband. It had been a constant ache, a wound that never truly healed. But now, it was a gaping, festering hole. How could she possibly reconcile her loneliness, her desire for connection, with a man like Mark Jensen? A violent criminal. A killer. The thought that she might be in danger crossed my mind fleetingly. Was she safe with him? Did she know what he was truly capable of? But that thought was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of personal betrayal. This wasn't about her safety. This was about a direct assault on my identity, on everything I had fought for. I felt a primal urge to confront them, to march back to that coffee shop, to yell, to demand answers, to expose him, to ask Sarah how she could do this. But then what? What would I say? What would it change? The image of Mark's triumphant smirk flashed in my mind, and I knew a confrontation would only give him more satisfaction. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to crumble, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. I had to understand this first. I had to piece together the shattered fragments of my world. The unthinkable had happened. The man I'd put in prison had not only walked free, but he had walked right into the life of the woman I used to call my wife. And in doing so, he had confirmed, in the most painful way possible, that in her eyes, I truly was the worst husband. And that was a reality I now had to learn to live with. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and restless days. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat. The image of Sarah and Mark together played on an endless loop in my mind, each replay sharper, more painful than the last. The shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, burning rage, and an overwhelming need for answers. My first impulse was to confront them, to storm over to Sarah's art studio. I knew she had one now. I'd heard from mutual friends, and demand to know what the hell she was thinking. To shout at Mark Jensen, to remind him of the life he took, the sentence he served, the monster he was. Practical side of my brain, the prosecutor in me, knew that was a terrible idea. It would only escalate things, make me look unhinged, and give Mark exactly what he wanted, a reaction. So I started digging, quietly, discreetly. I used my old contacts, my former colleagues in the DA's office. I couldn't just straight up ask about Mark Jensen's release and his new girlfriend. That would raise too many eyebrows. Instead, I'd casually bring him up in conversation, pretending curiosity about the parole system, about how early releases were handled. "Hey, Dave," I'd say to a former investigator, "remember that Jensen case? Pretty notorious. How do guys like him even get out early? I thought 20 to life meant, life." Dave, oblivious to my true motive, would launch into a technical explanation about good behavior, new rehabilitation programs, overcrowding issues. "Yeah, it's a pain, Alex. Happens more than you think. Some of these guys, they play the system perfectly. Model prisoners on the inside, then they get out, and who knows what they do." Who knows what they do? I knew one of them was dating my ex-wife. I also tried to find out how they met. This was the biggest puzzle. Did Sarah visit him in prison? Did she write to him? The idea sent shivers down my spine. Had she become one of those women who fall for incarcerated men, twisted by loneliness or a desire for attention? No, that wasn't Sarah. Not the Sarah I knew. But the Sarah I knew was gone. She was with Mark Jensen. And that meant the Sarah I knew was capable of things I couldn't comprehend. I checked her social media, which I rarely looked at. Her profile was private, but her mutual friends page had a few recent photos of Sarah. In one, she was laughing, her arm around someone whose face was cut off. The hand, the arm, the way she leaned in it, looked disturbingly familiar. Another photo was a group shot at an art opening. Sarah was there in the background, talking to a man whose back was to the camera. His build, his hairline, it was him, Mark. My heart pounded with a sickening rhythm. They were open about it. They weren't hiding. Which meant Sarah knew exactly who he was. She wasn't some naive victim Mark had manipulated. She had chosen him, consciously. This was no coincidence. This was deliberate. Cold, hard fact began to settle in my gut. This was revenge. Not just for her, but for him. Mark Jensen was getting back at me. He had taken the one person I had truly loved, the person whose accusations had crippled me. He had confirmed her words, that I was the worst husband, by showing her a better alternative. A man who literally embodied everything I fought against. It was a masterful, cruel stroke of vengeance. My anger flared hot and consuming. How dare he? How dare she? The thought of them together, sharing intimacies, sharing lives, twisted my inside. This wasn't just a matter of a new relationship. It was a perversion. The very idea of Sarah, kind, gentle Sarah, with a man capable of such brutality, was repulsive. I started to reevaluate our entire marriage. Had she harbored this resentment, this anger all along? Was our relationship, for her, always just a stepping stone? Something to endure until she found her true path to happiness, which apparently led straight to a convicted killer. The thought was soul-crushing. It made every moment we shared, every memory feel tainted. But beneath the anger, a sliver of worry gnawed at me. Mark Jensen was a dangerous man. I knew it because I had put him away. He was manipulative, ruthless, and capable of violence. Was Sarah truly safe? Or was she, in her desire to hurt me, in her bitterness and resentment, putting herself in harm's way? This concern fought with my own pain and rage. It was a bizarre internal conflict. I hated her for this, for choosing him, for confirming my greatest fears. But a part of me, the part that still remembered the love we shared, couldn't completely shut off the worry for her well-being. I knew I couldn't let this go. I needed more answers. I needed to know the full extent of this twisted relationship. I needed to know if this was just a spiteful act, or something deeper, something truly sinister. The ghost of Mark Jensen's revenge was haunting me, but I refused to let it consume me. I had to understand, even if the truth was more horrifying than I could imagine. The battle wasn't over. It had just moved from the courtroom to the battlefield of my shattered life. The need for concrete answers became an obsession. Casual inquiries to my former colleagues weren't enough. I needed facts. I needed to understand the timeline, the connection, the twisted logic of Sarah's choices. Was she a victim? Was she a participant? Or was she simply so consumed by her bitterness towards me that she found a warped comfort in the arms of my greatest professional enemy? I started by looking into Mark Jensen's prison records, something that was difficult to do without raising suspicion. I used a back channel, a friendly face in a state records office who owed me a favor. I asked for his disciplinary record, his visitor's logs, anything that might shed light on his time inside. The official story was exceptional rehabilitation, but I knew Mark. He was a master manipulator. He could fool anyone. The records came back. Clean disciplinary record, model prisoner. Attended all the required classes, showed remorse in parole board interviews. It was a perfect performance. And then I saw the visitor logs. Exio visits from a woman named Brenda Peterson, an old family friend. Then, about a year before his release, a new name started appearing. Sarah Vance. My heart lurched. Sarah Vance. Not Sarah Collins, her maiden name, not Sarah Miller, her married name with me. Sarah Vance. The same last name as Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the woman Mark Jensen had murdered. This couldn't be a coincidence. My blood ran cold. Sarah had changed her name. She had taken the last name of his victim. What in God's name was going on? The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a random meeting after his release. This was a direct, horrifying connection. She had sought him out. Or he had sought her out, using the victim's name as a twisted link. Had she known about Mrs. Vance? Of course she had. The case was infamous. But why would she adopt that name? Was it a perverse form of empathy, or a sick mockery? I dug deeper into the dates of her visits. They started about 2 years ago, well before his parole was even on the table, and they continued right up until his release. She had been seeing him in prison, my ex-wife. The woman who hated me for being consumed by my job, for putting criminals like him away. She had been visiting a murderer in prison. The realization was a crushing weight. This wasn't just a revenge plot orchestrated by Mark. This was Sarah's doing too. She had gone to him. She had opened this door. Had she known about the victim connection? Did she know that Mrs. Vance was Mark's victim? The thought was nauseating. I pulled up information on Mrs. Eleanor Vance again. She had no direct living relatives with the last name Sarah. So it wasn't a family connection. Sarah must have chosen that name. Why? Was it to show him she understood? To show him she sympathized? Or was it to taunt me? A twisted game where she aligned herself with the very person I had sworn to fight. The worst husband accusation took on a new horrifying dimension. Was this her ultimate way of proving I was awful? By choosing someone so diametrically opposed to everything I stood, by choosing the literal embodiment of my professional life's purpose. It felt like a deep personal insult, a total rejection of my values, my career, my very soul. My mind reeled with scenarios. Did Mark manipulate her from prison? Did he play on her vulnerability, her anger towards me? Or was she just so desperate for connection, so blinded by her bitterness, that she sought solace in the darkest of places? The Sarah I married, the vibrant, compassionate woman, couldn't possibly be this person. But the evidence was staring me in the face. She was. I considered confronting her, but what would I say? Why are you using the name of the woman he murdered? Did you visit him in prison? The questions were too raw, the answers too terrifying. And I didn't want to give Mark Jensen the satisfaction of seeing my pain. He was a master of psychological warfare. This was his long game, played out perfectly. The more I uncovered, the more disturbed I became. This wasn't just about a new boyfriend. This was about a complete and utter transformation of Sarah, or a side of her I had never ever known. It made me question everything about our marriage, every memory, every shared moment. Had I truly been so blind, so distant that I missed this darkness lurking beneath the surface? Or had my absence, my focus on my work, somehow pushed her to this extreme, to a point where she would embrace the very evil I fought against? The anger was still there, a burning ember in my chest, but it was now laced with a profound sadness. Sadness for the Sarah I knew, who was apparently gone. Sadness for the life we had built, which was now so thoroughly corrupted. And sadness for myself, for the man who had lost everything, only to find that the very foundations of his past were built on lies, or at least on deeply hidden truths he could never have imagined. The revelation of Sarah adopting the victim's name was the final, devastating blow. It cemented the fact that this was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was personal. It was a declaration. And I was left to grapple with the horrifying implications of a wife who chose to align herself with the man I had sent to prison, seemingly out of spite, or something even darker. I was unraveling, but I needed to keep going. I needed to understand the full extent of this twisted reality, before I could even begin to think about what came next. The truth, when it finally fully hit me, was a bitter, indigestible pill. Sarah, my ex-wife, had visited Mark Jensen in prison for years, even adopting the last name of his victim. The worst husband accusation wasn't just about my workaholic tendencies or emotional distance. It was a justification, a smokescreen, for a connection she had deliberately cultivated with the man I had put away. It was a level of betrayal that went beyond anything I thought possible. I locked myself in my apartment for a solid week after that discovery. I took time off work, claiming illness. The anger I felt was so immense, it was almost paralyzing. it morphed into a deep, guttural despair. The woman I had loved, the woman I had spent years mourning, was not only gone, but she had transformed into something I couldn't recognize. And she had done so, it seemed, to spite me, to inflict the ultimate wound. I considered every option. Should I report Mark Jensen for parole violation? But for what? Being in a relationship with my ex-wife wasn't illegal. Should I try to warn Sarah's family or her friends about him? Tell them who he truly was, remind them of his crime. But they already knew. And if Sarah had chosen him, what good would it do? They might even side with her, see me as the bitter ex-husband. The idea of confronting them, of demanding an explanation, still lingered. But the prosecutor in me, the one trained to assess risk and reward, knew it was futile. Mark Jensen would relish the confrontation, twisting my pain into his victory. And Sarah, she had made her choice. Her silence, her visits, her adoption of the victim's name, it spoke volumes. No words from her could possibly make sense of this. Ultimately, I chose not to confront them. Not yet, anyway. I realized that my desire for answers, for understanding, was still tied to my need for validation, for her to acknowledge that I wasn't the worst. But her actions had screamed the opposite. And I couldn't let that define me anymore. I couldn't let her or him continue to dictate my emotional state. The initial shock and rage began to ebb, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion. I had been fighting this invisible battle for years, trying to be a better man, trying to heal, trying to move on. But every time I thought I was making progress, something would drag me back down. This was the deepest plunge yet. But something else also started to emerge from the wreckage. A quiet, stubborn resilience. I had dedicated my life to justice, to holding people accountable for their action. Mark Jensen was a criminal, a manipulative one, and he had found a perverse way to hurt me. Sarah, in her own pain and anger, had become tangled in his web, or perhaps had found her own dark path within it. I couldn't control their choices or their motives, but I could control mine. I realized I needed to stop looking for answers in them. The answers had to come from within. I had to redefine myself not as the worst husband or the man who lost everything, but as someone who had survived incredible pain and betrayal. I had to find a way to live with this monstrous truth without letting it consume me. My focus shifted. Instead of digging into their lives, I started investing in my own. I went back to therapy, a step I had avoided for too long. I talked about Sarah, about Mark, about the crushing weight of their choices. I began to unpack the guilt I carried from the divorce, separating my professional dedication from my personal failing. I learned that while I had indeed been an imperfect husband, my devotion to justice was not inherently wrong. It was a part of who I was, a part I couldn't and shouldn't erase. I started going to the gym regularly, pushing myself physically. I reconnected with old friends, making a conscious effort to be present, to engage. I started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago, a way to express the emotions I couldn't voice. My canvases were dark at first, filled with shadows and sharp edges. But slowly, tentatively, colors began to creep in. Pain of seeing them together, the knowledge of Sarah's twisted choices, will probably never fully disappear. It's a scar, deep and permanent, but it no longer dictates my every thought. I accepted that I may never truly understand Sarah's motivations, or how she could find solace with a man like Mark Jensen. Perhaps it was revenge. Perhaps it was a profound misjudgment. Perhaps she saw something in him that I, as his prosecutor, never could. It didn't matter anymore. Her choices were hers. My life was mine. I still work as a prosecutor. passion has returned, tempered now by a deeper understanding of human complexity and the fragility of relationships. I still believe in justice, but I've learned that justice doesn't always bring peace, and that life is messy and unpredictable. I haven't seen Sarah and Mark Jensen since that day outside the coffee shop. I still see her name, Sarah Vance, sometimes in online art directories. It's a jolt every time, a stark reminder of the bizarre reality of my past. But the sting is less sharp, the bitterness less potent. I was called the worst husband, and maybe in some ways I was. I made mistakes. I prioritized my work. I lost the woman I loved. But I also sent a dangerous man to prison. And when that man reappeared in the arms of my ex-wife, a cruel twist of fate, I didn't crumble. I was cracked. Yes, deeply and profoundly. But I was not broken. I was still standing, slowly rebuilding. And finally, after years of being adrift, finding my own path forward, one painful, determined step at a time.